Hey everyone, I'm going to share a story that explores the idea of whether or not we exist inside of a simulation. And it's a story that leads me to believe that, in fact, we do exist inside of a simulation. And I'd like to preface the story by first saying that I'm going to be discussing a couple of psychedelic medicines that are sometimes perceived to be controversial, ketamine and MDMA. And I'm just going to ask that if you aren't already familiar with these medicines, if you haven't done much research into them, or perhaps if you have negative connotations associated with these medicines, to just simply keep an open mind about what these medicines, these tools are able to afford us. And by no means am I suggesting or even advocating that everyone go out and try these psychedelic medicines. But just please keep an open mind about the fact that they can be extremely beneficial if used with proper intention and by individuals who are going into the experience consciously and who have a sense for what they're doing. And just in case you're unfamiliar with who I am, I've spoken at length about psychedelics and entheogens in the past, but just in case you're new to my conversations, I'll just say that I live a very holistic lifestyle that involves a life full of play and enjoyment and pursuing my passions, in addition to meditation, movement, training, physical exercise, writing, and various things, all of which I believe contribute to my well-being. And psychedelics play a role into this holistic lifestyle. They are tools that I use periodically, maybe anywhere between 0 and 15 times per year, let's say. And never do I use them as a means of escapism, but rather as a means of exploration, and learning new perspectives and expanding my awareness. And so yeah, with this video, I'm hoping that you can share this as widely as possible, because I know there's research being done by Elon Musk and some other people in Silicon Valley regarding whether or not we are in a simulation, and I am quite curious if anyone else has had an experience similar to what I'm about to describe. So I'll start by saying that there was a group of 20 friends and we rented a house for the Halloween weekend. And on the Saturday afternoon, my friend Tim and we were walking downtown in the city which we were in, and we'd been walking for about an hour, a number of kilometers away from the house we had rented. And at that time, I decided that I wanted to talk with Tim about Natalie, Justine, and Sierra, 3 of the women who were renting the house with us, who I had just met for the first time this weekend. And I was just about to tell Tim how wonderful I thought they are. And the moment I mentioned their names, Natalie, Justine, and Sierra, they crossed in front of us about 40, 50 feet in front of us at an intersection. And when that synchronicity occurred, both Tim and I just started laughing our heads off. We didn't even bother shouting to the women because it was just too funny for us at that time. So anyway, later that night, we went to this mansion party for Halloween. It was about 3,500 people in a 72-room manor of temptations and consequences. And throughout this mansion, there were an incredible array of rooms with different performances, immersive art, dance floors with incredible DJs playing, all sorts of different activities and experiences one can have inside this manor. And so, as I mentioned, regarding ketamine and MDMA, I was using both of these medicines at this time, so I was under their influence. And my friend Wolf found Tim and me, and being familiar with this mansion, he sort of grabbed us by the proverbial hand and guided us into a couple of rooms. And then he said, "Hey guys, I want to take you into this one." And so we walk into this room where there are these two women who are supposedly, hired performers, and they're putting on this dance, and there's about, let's say, 50 people in the room with them. There's a clawfoot bathtub that's filled with water and shaving cream. One of the women is inside of the bathtub in her, I believe it was a onesie, a bodysuit, and then the other woman was sitting behind the bathtub. And all 50 people in the room were just essentially observing these two women's dance performance. And it was super interesting. And I felt this energy flow through me that didn't belong to Michael Sanders, to my human identity, but it guided me towards the two women, and I sort of crossed that threshold between audience and performer and engaged with the performers and started dancing beside the bathtub, at which point I had an out-of-body experience whereby my consciousness was observing from up here, and it was looking down at my body dancing. And I can have a tendency to get into some extremely expressive dancing, especially if I'm able to enter into a total flow state and sort of detach from my identity. My body can become quite liquid-like, expressing almost a feminine seductress type movement. And I was dancing with these women and fully immersed in their performance. I could hear people in the room actually laughing and questioning, like, what the hell is this guy doing? I too was just an observer to my body in this moment. And I was dressed like Tarzan. I had only a loincloth on and a leopard print scarf. And I start moving, and then I just feel the urge to dunk my head into the water and the shaving cream, and my body continues to move. And it felt as though there was some energy flowing through me. And then I felt music, a song about to be given birth to. Again, not of my own creation, but rather coming from elsewhere. And then coming out of my vocal cords, something to the effect of dun 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 dun. And I was making these noises fairly quietly, especially given the fact that there's a room with so many people. But I could feel this swirling energy that was building and building. That was the manifestation of this song, wherever it was from. And so I'm singing dun 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 dun, not necessarily sure that anyone else can hear me. But then Tim, who's in the room as well, maybe 15 feet away, he starts sounding, and he's going, oh, and I can feel that the energy that I was describing flowing through me is also interacting and flowing through him. And, Tim doesn't typically sing or sound, and speaking with him afterwards, he said it felt as though the energy just grabbed onto him and started eliciting the noise from his vocal cords. And it felt as though some seance was brewing, like this, I don't know, Halloween-esque energy, and they say that at this time of the year, the veil between different forms of reality is the thinnest. And so it felt like this seance, this ritual was occurring that we were all vehicles for and not the creators of. And so I continue with the dun 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 dun, and I'm dancing and swaying, and my hips are gyrating, and I'm moving up and down and rolling on the floor, and putting my hands and head in the shaving cream filled bathtub, interacting with these two performing women. And then other people in the room start singing, and they start stomping their feet and clapping their hands, and it's just like dun 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 dun, whoa, dun 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 dun, and this beat is just accumulating. And within, probably only a couple of minutes, there were more people started to coming into the room. maybe 50 to 80 at this time, all stomping their hands. Some people are laughing, but everyone seems to be engaged in this song that is enveloping and flowing through the room. And it was really powerful, and again, it didn't feel as though it was my or anyone else's creation, but an energy with a consciousness of its own, essentially using us to give birth to it. And so this continued on for maybe 7-8 minutes. My sense of time isn't the best from this moment, but it was really intense, and it almost became overwhelming since I felt more like a vehicle for something rather than in control of it. Now, just as a caveat, I could disengage from it at any point if I had wanted to, but it was quite enjoyable and fascinating. So after about that 7 or 8 minutes, one of the performers held my arm and she guided me out of the room. And Tim came with me, and both he and I realized, like, hey, what is happening? We need to make sense of this. That's what our minds wanted to do. So we found this closet, and he and I walked into it and closed the door. And then he immediately closed his eyes, I closed my eyes, and we were both making these sounds of like, oh. And as I would open my eyes periodically, the room felt like it was going like, and that I was totally leaving my body and polyphasing into another form of reality, perhaps into another dimension. And it felt like this vessel of sorts started enveloping us, both Tim and me. And just to paint a mental picture for you, Tim was wearing this golden hood with a band around it, like some pharaoh or Egyptian. And I felt mine and his energies start merging, and though we had physical distance between us, it felt as though our auras and our energy bodies were becoming unified. And then this voice started flowing through me, and I felt the presence of beings that weren't on three-dimensional planet Earth. And they start speaking in this sort of cadence. You and Tim are taking things too seriously. Just calm down and everything will be all right. Just breathe, just breathe, just breathe. We are here and you are safe, and there is nothing for you to worry about. Just stay calm and keep breathing, and everything will be okay. It already is. And this voice was definitely not my own, but simply flowing through me. And at that point, I felt as though we were being taken on to an alien vessel, an abduction, if you will. I'll have to look up the word abduction because it certainly wasn't violent, and sometimes I think that the word abduction has a degree of non-consent is what sometimes I think the word abduction means. So I wouldn't say that there was any non-consent. It was more of an invitation, and then these beings were taking us onto their ship with them. And I could feel Tim's energy and his breathing and a slight fear on his part. And I was simply expressing, it's okay, it's okay. Because he's a brother to me and one of my best friends. I just want to make sure he's feeling okay. And I know that he and I have many conversations about the notion of death, and particularly in certain psychedelic experiences, you can experience what death feels like, and that experience is oftentimes overwhelming for Tim. And the moment that the onset of the effects is about to occur, he'll feel a tremendous amount of resistance towards it, and it'll feel incredibly painful. So in this moment inside the closet in the mansion, I could feel his fear, his resistance towards the death, and he could also feel my openness towards it. So in those similar psychedelic experiences, I'm able to just totally surrender and allow and invite the death in, because I don't see death as the end of anything, but rather an extension, a transition from life. And not to suggest that one perspective is superior to the other. That's just his experience towards death has resistance, and mine does not. And so then this voice, it's almost like a sterile, very calm, monotonous voice, as though it's following a protocol, though I could sense a lovingness and a friendliness to it. And again, it said, "You and Tim are taking things too seriously. Just breathe. You are human and we are here. Just relax, just breathe, and stay calm. Everything will be all right. It already is all right." And then at that moment, I was no longer in my human body, or my three-dimensional human body, but I opened my eyes into another dimension, and I was inside of a white room with a mask on my face. And the voice said, "Just breathe." And I go with my hand over the mask. And as I do that, I enter back into my body on planet Earth in the third dimension inside this mansion. And then Tim opened his eyes and we looked at one another and we're just like, what? Holy shit. Like, what the fuck? And he just started laughing. And I was wide-eyed for the rest of the night. Because I feel as though I broke through the simulation, that I existed outside of the simulation. I woke up in this white room with these beings who, for the record, I couldn't see. They were behind me. And my hand looked the same as my human hand, so it gives me a reason to believe that perhaps my body outside of this simulation is of similar construction. However, I felt much bigger. I felt as though I was the equivalent of 40 or 50 feet tall, though I sensed that in this reality everything was relative. So, although it's difficult to say because I was in essentially a white sterile room, and it seemed to me as though I was playing some sort of game, the way that we might play virtual reality these days by putting on a headset and then entering into the virtual space. It seems as though I'm existing in this sterile room, this white room, where you put the mask on and you breathe, and then you enter into this three-dimensional human experience on planet Earth that we all know as consensus reality. And it was so profound and obvious that in the moment there was no doubt whatsoever that we exist in a simulation. And I can actually still feel the connection to that realm right now. And it's almost a bit irreconcilable, to be honest. It's tough. It's somewhat tough to integrate. I mean, it's fun. It's cool. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's awesome. It's just a little different than I may have thought reality was. And so afterwards, I find a number of my friends at this party, and I actually then run into Daniel Pinchbeck, who is a prolific author who writes about psychedelics, shamanism, prophecies, consciousness, ecology, and who I've read in interviews touching on simulation theory and us existing in a simulation. So as soon as shortly after coming out of my experience of realizing that I exist in a simulation, here comes up an author and a speaker who explores that topic. And I was like, oh, that's a very interesting synchronicity. And then I walked into another room, this separate building from the mansion, where there were incredible DJs playing music, and then there was a sign behind it that said, "Sell your soul to me." And it just all seemed like part of a simulation that we would create. Everything started to feel this almost a sense of fakeness to me. And it's a fakeness that I've felt in the past as well with our reality. It's not necessarily bad, it's just as though it is a simulation. And so then a group of us found ourselves outside at the front of the mansion, And I was sharing with Tim, because Tim asked me, he's like, dude, what the hell is going on? Like, what is happening? And I started expressing to him, man, I think we live inside of the Matrix, and I sense that perhaps this simulation is dissolving. Like maybe we only have a week left in it. I don't know. Or maybe it'll last eternally. I don't know. And then I said to him, I'm like, you remember earlier in the day when we were walking through the city and I mentioned Natalie, Justine, and then at that moment Tim starts laughing because Natalie, Justine, and Sierra appear immediately beside me in front of this mansion. For the second time in the day that I mention their names, they appear immediately beside me. And I was just like, all right, like, fuck. I mean, it's just so crazy. And then I didn't even finish the thought with Tim because he and I just both started laughing. And then I was walking with my other friend and brother, Justin, and I was telling him the story. And then I was like, yeah, man. And then I ran into Daniel Pinchbeck, who, I don't know if you know him, but he's this prolific author. I've been following him for a number of years. And then at that moment, I get bumped by someone putting on their jacket, and the guy turns around, and it's Daniel. And he looks at me. He's like, oh, hey, sorry, man. He's like, my name's Daniel, and shakes my hand. I'm like, yeah, I know your name. My name's Michael. Shake his hand and walk away. And then Justin just starts laughing. I start laughing. And almost as though it's just the simulation saying, like, hey, yeah, it's true. And, like, here are the clues. Here, it's a funny joke, you know? And it's interesting, too, because Daniel and I had chatted on the phone a couple of years ago, or a little more than 2 years ago, when I was first releasing my book, Ayahuasca and Executives Enlightenment. And we had never met in person, so I don't think he probably might not even remember the conversation, but it was just really fascinating that he appeared the moment that I was sharing that with Justin. So to conclude this video, I would love it if people would comment, if you would comment, if you've ever had this experience. Have you ever broken outside of the simulation? Because there are people researching it and they're putting tons of money into it. And I believe that going outside the simulation is accessible through the expansion of consciousness. I think these medicines like ketamine and MDMA can help, though I do not think they're necessary by any means. I believe we can access these realms through meditation or just intention. And I see these psychedelics as a tool like anything else, you know, like a pencil. You can use a pencil to write beautiful poetry or draw beautiful art, or you can use it to stab someone in the leg, you know, like your intention matters as to what sort of results it'll manifest. And I think similarly with psychedelics, they can be used for escapism and result in addiction and, you know, trauma, or they can be used to expand consciousness, learn new things, gather new perspectives, and then bring those perspectives back and share them with the world, since they typically, in my experience and those who I'm familiar with, these perspectives typically revolve around love and treating everything with love. So yeah, please let me know if you've ever awoken outside of the simulation. I love all of you, and I think this is one of the most fascinating concepts we can explore. It'd be great, you know, to further the research on these subjects. So, peace.